All right, so today we're finishing up with like the worms. We're going to be talking about the Acanthocephala, and then we're moving on to arthropods. So just beginning with the Acanthocephala, they're known as like the spiny-headed worms. That's because they have like a thorny proboscis that you'll see soon. And so what's kind of interesting about the Acanthocephala is they were kind of considered to be their own phylum, but genomic studies have kind of shown that they might be descended from animals called rotifers. So rotifers and like Acanthocephala together, they refer to them as Syndromata. So let me show you like, so this here would be like a clade. That's just a group of the organisms. We would have like Syndromata being like where the universal like ancestor would be. And then here we have the Acanthocephala, and then like the Monogonatoa, that's like the most common rotifers. So I guess just if you're not familiar with rotifers, they're just little animals. They can kind of vary a lot in terms of how do they look. Like here you have like a predatory one that has like jaws, and then you can have sessile ones that don't move, or ones that live in like little colonies together. But rotifers are not parasitic. So the Acanthocephala are parasitic. So anyway, so they lack a digestive tract, so they just absorb nutrients through their tegument or through their skin. They also have sexual dimorphism, so the males and the females look different from each other. All right, so here's just the general anatomy. So here is like their proboscis. It's full of little spikes that they use to like kind of embed and attach themselves into the intestines. This proboscis sheath is actually what they like store it in. So the proboscis can be retracted and shot out. And then similarly to the worms that we talked about last week, they have a copulatory bursa that they use to hold the female in place during mating. These cement glands are used to secrete like a substance that actually will close the vulva of the female after mating, so that the sperm cannot escape from the female. And then I think that substance will just eventually disintegrate within like a week. See, so the one that we're just going to be talking about today is just the most common one that you find in humans, monofiliformis. So it's very commonly, it just infects mostly like wildlife and mostly animals. Infection in humans is actually kind of rare. So they're pseudocolumate and pseudosegmented. So they somewhat have like a body cavity, and then they're like somewhat segmented. Their color is like whitish. The females are bigger than the males. So the females can reach about 30 centimeters long. And then, like I mentioned earlier, the proboscis is armed with little spikes, and that's just used to attach to the intestines. And so usually if there's any symptoms caused by this parasite, it's usually just pain that's caused by the proboscis just digging into the intestines. All right, so here's a life cycle of this parasite. So we have here like the eggs that would be found in the environment. The eggs would then be ingested by like arthropod intermediate hosts, particularly like roaches. So the larvae forms would then develop within the little roach. And then so the way other animals would become infected was then be if they eat, say, like the infected arthropod. And then humans can also be infected if they eat just any food or anything that might be contaminated by these like arthropod hosts. And so the then like the developing adult form would then just colonize the small intestine of the human. And so in the human, the adult forms, they tend to not really go into like full development. So you usually won't see eggs released from a human. You'll usually only see the eggs released from these other animals. All right, so here's what the eggs look like. They're just pretty like elongate, so long and oval shaped. They have like a thick, clear shell. And then inside here is the little larva, which it's called an acanther in this species of parasite. And like I said, it's very rare for humans to shed eggs. And then here's just a picture of an adult. So you can just see here that pseudo-segmented body. And then here at the very tip would be the proboscis. So it's actually retracted in this picture. It can actually shoot out and get like a lot longer than this. All right, and so here's like kind of a detailed like drawing diagram. I know it's kind of confusing the way it's laid out, but like, so here would just be the egg. Here in number 2 is just showing the like the proboscis here, and then just part of its duct where it's stored. Here would be just showing the female reproductive system mostly. Here in number 5 is like a zoomed in version of that. And then here is just a zoom in of the proboscis and all the little hooks that it has. All right, so yeah, so that's the only Acanthocephala we're going to talk about today. So is there questions about the Acanthocephala?
Is there a reason why it's very rare for humans to shed the eggs?
Just that for some reason they just don't really mature very well in the human. Like, why do they not do so well in the human? It's not really known, but yeah, for some reason they just don't do as well in the human.
Okay.
All right. So then we're going to be wrapping up the class with the arthropods. So if you're familiar with like arthropods, they're a very diverse group of animals. You know, they range from like lobsters to crabs to spiders to, I don't know, cockroaches, all sorts of different things. So they can, you know, they look pretty different from each other. But overall, I guess what unites them would be their segmented bodies. So do I have like a picture? No. Oh well. So their bodies are segmented. So if you're referring to like all the segments together, you would just refer to that as tagma. So then like the major segments that they're made up of would be the head, the thorax, and the abdomen. The head being like the first one, the thorax in the middle, abdomen in the bottom. And then sometimes the head and the thorax can be fused into one. It's called as a cephalothorax. And so all the organisms that we're going to talk about today, whenever they bite like a human, they have like an anticoagulant in their saliva that kind of helps prevent the blood from clotting so that they can suck more blood out of you. It also can also kind of numb the area so that you won't feel it when they're biting you. All right, so the first parasite we're going to be talking about is Dermacentor, part of class Arachnida. So that's what like spiders are part of. So this is known as the Rocky Mountain wood tick. It's known for transmitting the diseases called Rocky Mountain spotted fever, Colorado tick fever, or tularemia. Those are all spread by bacteria. So the way that the tick becomes like infected with these diseases is by feeding on like a small mammal, like who is infected with this disease. And then so the nymph, like the little baby or the adult, can be a vector for these diseases. So here would just be a diagram of the adult of the ticks. So you can kind of just see this center or area is kind of like a white area, so that can kind of help differentiate them. Here would just be their different legs numbered here, like coxa 1, 2, 3, 4. Those are just the numbering of the different legs. Trochanter is just the center portion of the leg. Tarsus would be the very like tip of the leg. And then these palps is kind of part of just their mouth region that helps them feed. So this is just showing their morphology, the differences between like the male and the female. So here the male is kind of just more colored. We see the nymph. So if you're wondering kind of like what's the difference between like a larva and a nymph, because sometimes people use them like interchangeably, but they shouldn't really be an interchangeable term. Usually the nymph is like, it looks almost the same as the adult. It's really just smaller, where the larva really looks a lot different from the adult. All right, so then moving on to the next parasite is Pediculus humanus. And depending on what part of the body it infects, it would be called capitis or corporus. So these are part of class Insecta, so known as like the true insects. So this causes the disease known as pediculosis, or lice is what you probably know it more as. So louse is actually like a singular term, where lice would be the plural term. So capitis would be like the head louse or head lice. Corporus would be the body lice. And so telling them both apart is very difficult. They almost look the same morphologically. And so although they look the same, they won't like interbreed with each other. The only way to get them to like interbreed with each other would be like through like a lab, but naturally out in the wild they won't breed with each other. So they're like an obligate parasite of humans. They feed on the blood of humans. So the terminology for when feeding on blood, that's hematophagic. So they have to complete their entire life cycle on one host. They can't jump from host to host, and humans are their only hosts. And so people tend to think that maybe lice can be spread from like one person to another, but that really only happens if you really like touch something that the infected person used, because they have really short legs that they actually can't jump. It's actually kind of difficult for them to really walk efficiently. They tend to just climb on the hairs. All right, so here's just a little bit more information about capitis, which is the head lice form. So these guys are not vectors for any other like diseases. All they'll do is just suck your blood and lay eggs. That's all they do. And then all stages of this parasite will suck blood. So like the nymph and the adults. And then so moving on to corporus, which is like the body louse. These can be a vector for different diseases, such as typhus, relapsing fever, or trench fever. Those are spread by the bacteria known as Rickettsia, Prowazowski, Borrelia, or Bartonella. So overall, in order to like prevent getting these diseases, you kind of just would like to, cover your skin. Example, like if you're hiking or something. And so what's also different about the body lice compared to the head lice is that the body lice actually won't live on the host, where the head one actually will always just stay on your head and just keep sucking blood from your head. These body lice will only move onto the body of the host when they want to feed, and then they'll then leave the body of the host to then lay their eggs. So they tend to lay their eggs in like clothes or just like bedding somewhere kind of nearby the host. That way they don't have to, go too far away from the host in order to feed. And so they can feed for up to like 5 times a day, and they can live for about 30 days. And then, but if they get separated from their host, they'll die within a week. So overall, they don't want to go too far away from their host. So here is just showing a diagram of the various bodily structures. So here's like the head, the thorax, and the abdomen. They have like little antennas here they can use for sensing. And then here's like, you can see their little like hooks on their feet that they really use to help them just climb onto hairs. All right, and so here's a comparison of the male and the female. So the female is kind of like longer, kind of also has more of a wide space in between these structures here. And then you can also see that there's eggs actually inside of the female's body. Yeah, so 6 legs project from the fused segments of the thorax. They have like short legs and large claws, so that's, again, just that's what helps them to cling and like climb onto the hair. And so these segments known as spiracles, so that's what these like little bumps are called, spiracles. The little holes in them is what helps them breathe. All right, and so here's the egg. So their egg has a operculum at the top where the little larvae would be released from. So what's kind of, I guess, unique or interesting about this parasite is they secrete like the glue-like structure. It's actually similar to like the material that keratin is made out of, and they'll actually just stick their egg to the hair of a host. And only the head lice form does this. The body lice form doesn't do this, because remember, the body louse just lays their eggs just out in the open, like on the bed or something. So it's capitis that will stick the egg to the hair. And then so moving on to the Pithurus, this is known as like the crab louse or the pubic louse. So these are the ones that you would find like in pubic hair, so they tend to be spread by like sexual contact. They can also be found in more like coarse hairs, such as like armpits or eyelashes or even like beards. But they tend to just more so be in the pubic area. They'll really only move to say like those other areas if, say, you like scratch down there and then they get moved over to like the beard or something. And so similarly to the other lice, they also can't jump, so they'll just stay restricted to like whatever area of the body they happen to like infect. And they also only infect humans. They don't have any like animal intermediate hosts. They tend to be slightly smaller than the head and the body lice. So that's a way to like differentiate them. And so usually like the main symptom is like usually itching, and that usually is caused by their saliva. So here's just a diagram of them. So they're kind of more like stout and shorter than the head and body lice. Here we can just see their head, their thorax, and their abdomen. They tend to have kind of more, I don't know, they look kind of more buff, to be honest, when you look at like their legs, and they're just more adapted for climbing onto the more like coarse or rough hair. Yeah, so here they are, right? They look pretty buff because they have just like much stronger looking legs than the head or the body lice has. And here you can see the female is actually clinging on to the hair here. So that's really what these 2 legs here are for. They're really meant for clinging onto hair, where these front legs here are kind of more so just for crawling around. And then here she has an egg inside of her. Let's see. And so this form of louse is also not a known vector for any disease. So that's something that it has similar to like the head louse. And so yeah, so the forelegs are very delicate. Those would be the very front legs. And then the other 2, you know, stout looking more buff legs, that's what's used for just grabbing and climbing onto the hair. Overall, they have a very broad and short abdomen. And similarly to the head louse, they also attach their eggs to the hair shafts. So they like, you know, glue their eggs onto the hair. All right, so moving on to Cymex. This is known as the bed bug. So they've been like found to carry pretty nasty diseases such as MRSA. That's methicillin Staphylococcus aureus, which is a pretty bad form of Staph aureus because it's very resistant to like drugs, so it's very hard to treat. VRE is vancomycin resistant. I think Enterococcus. This one is a particularly bad bacteria because vancomycin is known as the like antibiotic of last resort. So yeah, for bacteria to be resistant to vancomycin, that's pretty bad news. They're also known to carry like HIV and hepatitis, but luckily for us, there's actually very little evidence to suggest that they can actually transmit these diseases to humans, even though they carry them. So they carry them, but they're not very good vectors. So when you get a bite with a bed bug, that's known as silicosis. It just causes like blisters, skin rashes. Sometimes it can cause like psychological effects from like the saliva. Also just allergic symptoms also from their saliva. And so similarly to like the body lice, these guys don't live on like the body of the host. They only go up to the host just to get a blood meal, and they can survive for up to 6 months in between feedings. So here's a little nymph. So again, nymphs just look smaller than the adults. They're very pale in color, and this dark spot here is just an identifying feature. It doesn't really have like a function. And so here's the adults. So the females overall look more broad in shape, I guess to help carry eggs. Here we have like the head, the pronotum, the wing pad, and the abdomen. So they have like a wing pad, which means that they may have had wings maybe in the past. It's called like a vestigial structure, where maybe like early in evolution they maybe had wings, but then they might have like lost them over time. And then so a vestigial structure would be like something that's kind of like remnants of what may have been there before, but they don't have like wings anymore. So here's their eggs. So the eggs also have an operculum. They're like kind of clear in color. So after they hatch, you can see they're pretty like clear. And then there's like little nymphs just mixed in there as well. And so another way to identify them is when they're like more than 5 days old, they'll have like an eye spot, which is just like a dark spot on them. Again, just why, like what function does that have? It's not really known. It's just something that occurs with age. So the female bed bugs can lay about 2 to 3 eggs per day, and her lifetime may last several months. So she can lay, a couple like 100 of eggs throughout her lifetime. All right, so the next parasite we're going to be talking about is Glossinia, class Insecta. So you might remember Glossinia as being the tsetse fly. We talked about this fly earlier in the semester because it's the vector for Trypanosoma brucei. And so they feed on the blood of vertebrate animals. So that makes them obligate parasites. So something that kind of sets the tsetse fly apart from other flies is when they rest, they kind of fold one wing like exactly over the other one. So they're like perfectly overlapping. So that's something that's kind of unique about the tsetse fly. So here's just showing a diagram of the adult. You just have 4 legs, the proboscis that they use, that's like their mouth that they insert into the human to suck blood. They have antennae just for sensing, their large wings, their thorax, their abdomen, and they have compound eyes, which is just a bunch of like segmented eyes, and then on the top of their head they have simple eyes, so they can kind of see in like a bunch of different directions. Right, and so the way that Glossinia reproduces is actually kind of unique and interesting, I thought. So we have copulation, which is mating, and so what happens is the little larva actually develops within the female. She doesn't lay eggs, so she actually, is pregnant. And so the pupa is kind of like a cocoon that the larvae will form once it is released from the female, and then the pupa then develops into the adult. So the egg like actually hatches within the female, and then the little larva develops within the female. So here's like another picture of that. So here's like an actual pregnant female. You can see how just more like swollen she is. And so she has what's called a milk gland, and that's actually just what nourishes the larva as it's developing inside of her body. And so the term viviparity, that's the term used for when animals give live birth as opposed to like laying eggs. So that's what she goes through, adenotrophic viviparity. That just means that the eggs hatch within her, and then the milk gland nourishes it, and then the female gives live birth. And then giving birth to a larva is just known as larviposition. So yeah, like any questions about the Glossinia development? It's actually pretty unique in comparison to like other insects. All right. So then the next one we're gonna go over is Similium. You also might remember we talked about this a few weeks ago, that it's the vector for Acanthocephala volvus, one of the worms that we talked about a few weeks ago. So the adult males actually just feed on nectar, and so the females are the only ones that feed on blood. And so the term autogeny, that's the term that's used for when they only feed on blood, like specifically like to help their eggs develop, and specifically like before they lay their eggs. That's the term for that. So the females will like also feed on nectar when they're not about to lay eggs. And so also these guys also kind of have a unique life cycle in that the eggs are actually laid in water, and then the larvae then have to like hatch, and then they'll attach to either rocks or like plants in the water. They'll then actually form pupa or cocoons under the water, and then they like will emerge through a bubble in the water as the flying adult. And so also something that's kind of unique to Similium is that they can cause like a swarm. So here's just a picture of a big swarm of them. And so what happens is in this like swarm behavior is this is when like intense feeding can occur. And so if you get like bitten by a lot of them during a swarm, you can develop what's known as black fly fever. It just has symptoms such as headache, nausea, fever, swollen lymph nodes, aching joints, and this reaction is probably just caused by the saliva. All right, so then here's their life cycle. We have like the adult here. So the adult lays eggs. You have here the larva. Here they have little hooks on like the bottom of their body. You can't see it in these pictures, but that's what they use to like attach to rocks or to plants. So then they form a cocoon, which is known as like pupate, when they like form a cocoon because the pupa is within the cocoon. So yeah, so like the term pupa and cocoon is not like interchangeable. The pupa is inside of the cocoon, but then the process of forming a cocoon can also be called pupate. So I guess, don't get confused with those different words. All right, so here's just a more, I guess, detailed diagram of their life cycle. Again, here's just the pupa within the cocoon, and then the pupa within the cocoon then will eventually develop into adult, and then they'll hatch from the cocoon. And then this little like humpback that they have here, or thoracic sclerite, is just something that is also useful in identifying Similium. And then so the adult, again, just lays eggs on water, usually plants, and then the eggs will hatch, and then you'll have your larva. And so here's a picture of eggs on a leaf. And something that kind of sets them apart from the other eggs we talked about today is that they're pretty dark in color, like a brownish blackish color. And so here's just a more detailed picture of the larvae. So the larvae have what's called cephalic fans. You can see them here from like a side view. Here's like a anterior view or a front view. They're just used for filtering like the water, so they can like capture food in these fans and then eat the food. And so some species may lack cephalic fans, but most of them tend to have them. Right, so then moving on to Acanthocephalides. This is known as the dog flea, so kind of just your common flea. So they can act as an intermediate host for the parasitic worms. The tapeworms that we talked about, I think 2 weeks ago, Diptylium caninium. So that was also like a dog tapeworm that we talked about a few weeks ago. It can also be a vector for a parasitic nematode that we didn't talk about. So I guess I wouldn't be worried about that one. So here's like the life cycle of the flea. So basically you have the adult, it lays eggs, the larvae hatch from the eggs. You have here the pupa or the cocoon, and then this here is like the adult before it like emerges from the cocoon. So this is like as it's forming within the cocoon, and then once it hatches, there's the full adult. So here's their eggs. They're very whitish, sometimes kind of clear looking or transparent. So feeding on blood is necessary for oviposition. That's a term for like laying eggs. And so considering their size is like within the millimeter range, you can actually see them with the naked eye. And so here's on the larvae, you just have the head. Here's like the posterior with little like sensory hairs on them. So the way the larvae feeds is the larvae does not like bite the host. The larvae just eats mostly just feces that the adults shed. And so the feces of the adult will have like blood particles within them. So that's just how the larvae gets nutrients. And then so the content within their guts is just visible as like dark, just a dark looking color. And then so they have salivary glands, which is what they use to like form the silk and how they form the cocoon in which they pupate. So here's the little pupa or the cocoon form. So you actually can't see the cocoon itself because it's sticky, and so like any sand or whatever will actually cover the pupa. So usually that's all you can see is just the sand covering it. So this just helps perform camouflage and protection for the adult as it's undergoing metamorphosis or just development. And so here's just a more detailed diagram of the adult. So they have these combs structures. They're actually not really known what function they have, but this is a way to like differentiate the different species. Some species may not have these comb structures. So I'll mention that, talk more about that later. There's a structure called the pygidium. It's similar, or it's close to the anus, and in the females, it has the ovipositor, so known as that's just the structure that the eggs kind of pass through. And then something that's unique to the female would be the spermacathia. That's just an organ in which sperm is stored after mating. And so unlike the lice, the flea actually has legs that are specifically made for jumping. So they can actually jump from host to host up to 50 centimeters away. And so the way they find their host is through like using light or tactile clues, which would just be like sensing, like touching the areas around them with these little like hairs on their legs. They can also smell carbon dioxide. And so here's a comparison between the male and the female of Acanthocephalids. So a way to like tell them apart from different fleas is their head is a little bit rounder, and then also the combs, you can see them. And then so just when we look at the male and the female, you can see the female is kind of just more, a little bit bigger overall, also more like wide in the abdomen area. All right, so then moving on to Xenocyla, that's known as the rat flea. And so this is, I guess, kind of the famous flea in the sense that this is the flea that kind of was responsible for spreading the plague. The bacteria that causes the plague is known as Yersinia pestis. It also spreads murine typhus caused by the bacteria Rickettsia. And its life cycle is the same as Acanthocephalides. So the dog flea, it has the same life cycle as that one. So here's their larvae. Overall, they look pretty much identical to the other larvae of the dog flea that we just looked at. And they also gain their nutrients from eating the adult droppings and also from like dead skin cells. So they can also have this like darker appearance from the gut contents inside of them. And so here's a comparison between like the male and the female. So something that sets apart Xenophilia from the dog flea would be this mural rod. It's just kind of the structure located within like at the start of the leg. Again, it's like feature, its function's not really known, but it's just more visible in Xenophilia. So that's a good way to tell the rat flea apart from the dog flea. And then here in the female, you can actually see the spermacanthia is actually very clear and visible. And then also the female is a bit like, has a little bit more like a broad or wide abdomen. And then about those combs that I mentioned earlier, the genial combs, which would be around the mouth, and then the frontal combs would be like around the head. Those are absent on Xenophilia. So that's the last parasite. Okay. Today's quiz is only about the arthropods and the Acanthocephala. And then next week is your lab final exam. And the final exam is cumulative over all of the PowerPoints that we've talked about throughout the semester.